The threat is real. That's what lawmakers and experts say about the danger posed by drones.
New details are now emerging about mysterious drone activity over U.S. military airspace.
For 17 nights in a row, something flew over one of America's most protected military bases, and no one could stop it. It wasn't a missile. It wasn't a bird. It wasn't even picked up until it was already inside restricted airspace. Langley Air Force Base, home of the F-22 Raptor, one of the most strategically important air installations in the United States. In late 2023, its airspace was repeatedly and deliberately breached by fast-moving, unidentified aerial systems, what the military now calls UASs. The rest of the world just calls them what they are, drones.
And my understanding, tell me if I'm wrong here, the military does not think this is just a bunch of hobbyists, right?
No, that was like initially when this started to happen, I think that was a theory, but then it was rejected quickly because it's the sheer number of the drones that were flying over this base regularly every evening after dusk.
But these weren't hobbyist drones. They were bigger, faster, smarter. And they didn't just appear once. They came back again and again for over 2 weeks straight. No one saw them coming, no one caught them leaving, and the United States military didn't fire a single shot. This happened on American soil, and the official explanation? There isn't one. In the aftermath, the public was barely told anything. The Pentagon kept it quiet. Major media outlets barely touched the story.
The fact that the federal agencies responsible for briefing the public have not come forward in a clear way is unacceptable. There has to be some explanation to the public for all this increased activity, and they must do so now.
But inside the defense community, the message was clear. We are being watched, and we don't know by who. Over the next few months, similar incidents occurred in other parts of the country. Arizona, New Jersey, New York. One of these drones physically collided with a U.S. fighter jet in midair. Another followed a Coast Guard vessel for nearly 15 minutes. The sightings weren't isolated. They were coordinated and precise, and then they stopped, without warning, without explanation, leaving behind no wreckage, no origin, and no accountability. So what were they? Some believe this was reconnaissance, foreign surveillance, testing our defenses. Others suspect domestic black projects, rogue contractors, or government tests gone too far. And some believe these weren't from any known program. Not ours, not theirs, not anyone's. In 2023, the Pentagon confirmed that over 650 unidentified aerial encounters were reported by pilots and military personnel in a single year. Only a fraction have been explained. In this video, we'll walk through the timeline of the most serious breaches. We'll look at the government's response and their silence. And we'll explore the most compelling theories, including the ones officials refuse to address publicly. Because if the U.S. military can't control its own airspace, then someone else already does.
This morning, we know that for 17 days straight, unknown drones flew Langley Air Force Base in restricted airspace.
These things, whatever they are, were flying and hovering over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. It's housing one of the DoD's largest and most important military infrastructure and some of our most advanced fighter jets there. What you're watching right now is exclusive video of these things that a person came forward to News Nation and gave us. This is a witness who lives in the area nearby, and he described seeing these drones he estimated to be about the size of cars. Now, that is actually also corroborated in some of the new reporting. Pentagon officials, military officials, generals that have seen these things in person now say in the Wall Street Journal report that these things were about 20 feet long, that they were about 100 miles an hour going that speed or faster at an elevation of 3,000 to 4,000 feet altitude, and again, hovering at times over our very important Air Force Base.
In late 2023, something happened over the skies of Virginia that should have been impossible. Langley Air Force Base, home to the United States' most elite air combat fleet, experienced a sustained and repeated breach of its airspace. Not once, not twice, but 17 times, consecutively, over 17 nights. The intruders? Unidentified aerial systems, large, fast, advanced, and coordinated drones. Langley isn't just any base. It houses F-22 Raptors, fifth-generation stealth fighters that cost over $150 million each. It's a strategic jewel in the U.S. military's crown. Its airspace is tightly controlled, its runways monitored by high-resolution radar, infrared detection, and classified surveillance systems. Yet somehow, some things entered that airspace repeatedly and without permission, without response, without capture, and without consequence. Internal sources later confirmed that the drones were clocked moving at speeds upwards of 100 miles per hour. Some flew in formation, others darted off erratically, but they came back, every night. Local press barely covered it. The Air Force didn't issue a statement, and national outlets, silent. Why? What could fly over the United States military's most sensitive air zone night after night without identification and not trigger an official response? According to leaked accounts, Langley personnel suspended nighttime operations. Training missions were canceled. Entire squadrons were temporarily grounded. The skies above Langley were compromised, and no one had the authority or capability to clear them.
We are seeing these objects blinking with white lights, not in the strobe pattern that one would expect due to FAA regulations, but patterns that don't seem to meet anything that I'm aware of. Additionally, the objects apparently have been lit up, the large number of them, while they're operating over the base itself. So it did not appear, at least from the information I've received, that these objects were trying to conceal their location or their presence.
The drones didn't behave like amateur equipment. Some maintained stable, coordinated flight in adverse weather. Others appeared to linger at high altitudes. Military radar caught glimpses but never clear tracks. Visual confirmation was rare, mostly just red or white lights disappearing into the sky, and then nothing. No crash, no retrieval, no footage, no public investigation. There are three major reasons this is a problem. First, Langley is not in the middle of nowhere. It's surrounded by urban infrastructure, airports, naval installations, and critical satellite communications systems. A breach here means a breach of multiple defense layers, not just one. Second, if these were foreign drones, someone, China, Russia, even a non-state actor, was probing one of the most sensitive military zones in America, and succeeding. Third, and most disturbing, if they weren't foreign, then who? The United States has procedures for unknown aircraft, intercepts, warnings, radar tracking, and, if necessary, force. None of that happened. Either because the drones weren't seen in time, or because they weren't allowed to be touched. And that's where the theories begin. Some believe these drones were domestic, black-budget tech being tested on U.S. bases without informing base command, a stress test to see how radar systems respond. Others think it was a provocation, possibly from a foreign power, deliberately trying to trigger a reaction. And others don't think they were conventional at all. What matters is this: 17 nights, multiple craft, no engagement, no arrests, no public explanation. Ask yourself, if this happened over Area 51 or over Washington, D.C., would it have stayed quiet? Or is the silence the point? We know that the Department of Defense has been tracking unidentified aerial phenomena for years, long before it admitted to it publicly. We know that certain military zones have standing orders not to engage without high-level clearance, and we know that after the Langley incidents, similar events began surfacing in other states. Langley wasn't an isolated event. It was the first major breach, and it marked a shift in how we understand national airspace, not as a safe zone, but as an open question. And if the United States military can't protect its own skies, then who's really in control?
Welcome back. We have an update on an investigation we first brought you last month involving mysterious drones flying through restricted military airspace down near the Arizona border with Mexico.
One of them even collided with an F-16 fighter jet.
In January 2023, an F-16 fighter jet was mid-flight over the Barry M. Goldwater Range in Arizona, a military-controlled airspace where live fire exercises are conducted and civilian access is strictly prohibited. The pilot, part of the 162nd Wing of the Arizona Air National Guard, was conducting a routine training mission when something unexpected appeared in his path. It wasn't on radar, It didn't broadcast a signal, and it wasn't supposed to be there. At approximately 13,000 feet, the object struck the canopy of the jet with enough force to crack the outer shell. The aircraft remained airborne, but the pilot was forced to abort the mission and return to base. Upon landing, the initial assumption was a bird strike, standard protocol, but it wasn't a bird. Investigators couldn't find feathers, biological material, or any evidence consistent with wildlife. Instead, what they found were fragments, thin, metallic, and oddly manufactured. What was initially dismissed as routine was quickly reclassified. The report was buried for weeks, no press release, no public acknowledgement, but internally it triggered alarm. Because this wasn't just an intrusion, this was contact, and it raised a serious question. What kind of drone is capable of entering restricted airspace, climbing to 13,000 feet, and colliding with a U.S. fighter jet, without being seen on radar? More importantly, who sent it? Military investigators described the object as an unmanned aerial system of unknown origin. It was fast, maneuverable, and autonomous. There was no indication of remote piloting or visible control signals. The drone had been flying without transponder identification and had no flight plan filed with the FAA. At first, officials suspected it might belong to a rogue civilian, but the area was too secure. The Barry-Goldwater range isn't just off-limits, it's monitored from all sides. No hobbyist drone, no commercial quadcopter, and no off-the-shelf system should have gotten within 50 miles of that airspace, let alone at combat altitude. That left only two options. Either it was a foreign surveillance platform, operated by a nation-state capable of high-risk intrusion, or it was something else entirely. The Department of Defense never publicly identified the manufacturer, operator, or point of origin. To this day, the object is simply referred to as an unidentified drone. In the aftermath, the Air Force began a quiet internal review. Flight crews across the Southwest were ordered to report any anomalies immediately. Tactical jets were fitted with enhanced optical pods, and counter-U.S. measures were upgraded, but with no public admission that anything had gone wrong. The bigger issue wasn't the drone, it was what it represented. This incident proved that American fighter aircraft, worth tens of millions of dollars flying in protected airspace, could be reached, touched, interfered with, and possibly targeted. And if this was a test, it succeeded. The Arizona collision marked the first confirmed case where an unknown drone didn't just breach airspace, it made physical contact with a U.S. military asset. And it wouldn't be the last time something strange appeared in the skies.
The mystery widens. Today, people in the New York metro area are reporting a growing number of drone sightings in their communities following a wave of mysterious drone appearances in the skies over New Jersey. This is sparking significant concern among residents and local and state leaders.
In early 2024, the phenomenon that started over Langley and escalated in Arizona took a new form. This time, it wasn't a solo breach. It was a coordinated swarm. Off the east coast of the United States, near the busy shipping lanes between New Jersey and New York, personnel aboard a U.S. Coast Guard cutter reported something that, until recently, would have been dismissed as implausible. They were being followed. At first it was one drone, then several. Within minutes, the crew counted at least a dozen aerial objects in tight formation, tracking the vessel as it moved through open waters. The encounter lasted between 10 and 15 minutes before the drones ascended and disappeared into cloud cover. There were no identification signals, no lights, no response to radio hails, just silent machines moving with unnatural precision. What made this case different was the setting.
The FBI is investigating several reports of mysterious nighttime drone flights that started last month in New Jersey. The drones were spotted over a military facility and Donald Trump's golf course.
This wasn't over a desert test range or inside a military base. It happened over busy commercial waters, well within reach of major ports, private airfields, and civilian flight paths. And it wasn't a solitary breach, it was a tactical demonstration. The objects moved in formation, adjusted spacing with the ship's speed, and maintained an offset flight angle, as if deliberately staying outside of the cutter's engagement envelope. It was, according to later reports, a show of capability. There were radar logs, visual confirmations, and encrypted transmission attempts made during the incident. None succeeded. The Coast Guard filed an incident report through official Navy channels, marking the objects as UAS of unknown origin. No organization stepped forward. No country claimed responsibility, and the story never reached national news. Privately, military analysts acknowledged what this likely meant. These drones were not improvised. They were operating as a coordinated system, likely pre-programmed, potentially using autonomous pathfinding. And the East Coast wasn't the only place they appeared. Civilian pilots flying out of Newark and JFK International began filing FAA reports of fast-moving aerial objects climbing through controlled airspace. In one case, air traffic controllers momentarily rerouted commercial traffic after multiple radar anomalies appeared at 9,000 feet and then abruptly vanished. The FAA attributed it to signal reflections and weather interference, but the reports kept coming. What was once an anomaly had now become a trend. Military airspace, urban corridors, open water, civilian airspace. No environment seemed off-limits. The most pressing question became, why here? New York and New Jersey host some of the most closely watched skies in the world. Between three major international airports, military assets, and constant radar coverage, this is not where you'd expect a stealth operation. Unless that was the point. Some believe the swarm was a calibration test, measuring detection thresholds and signal interference in a saturated environment. Others think it was psychological. A subtle way to send a message, we can be anywhere, at any time, and you still can't stop us. Unlike the Langley incidents, there was no operational shutdown, no emergency scramble, no lockdown orders, just quiet reports, passed up the chain, then buried. In the public eye, these events barely existed. But in defense circles, the implications were impossible to ignore. Unknown drones weren't just penetrating military zones anymore. They were now appearing near cities, near airports, near civilians, and no one, not the FAA, not NORAD, not Homeland Security, could say who was flying them, where they came from, or what they wanted. That silence, more than anything, is what kept the reports going underground. Because if they can follow a military vessel, if they can outpace an F-16, if they can hover off the coast of America's most populated metro area, then they're not just watching, they're already here.
The Pentagon is still not saying what officials think these things really are.
By the time 750 drone-related incidents had been logged across U.S. military and civilian airspace, one question dominated internal briefings and public speculation. Why hasn't the Pentagon acted? Not officially, not publicly, not even consistently behind closed doors. The breach at Langley, the Midair collision in Arizona, the coordinated swarm off the East Coast. Each of these events would, under ordinary conditions, justify a response, military engagement, press conferences, operational countermeasures. Instead, what followed was largely silence, but it wasn't due to indifference. It was due to something far more frustrating and dangerous. Legal constraints, procedural paralysis, bureaucratic conflict.
So, Gordon, you report that this issue made it all the way to the Situation Room in the White House, and they were brainstorming ideas for how they could capture these drones or stop these drones. Can you walk through some of these scenarios that they were trying to figure out?
Sure. And I mentioned that the Pentagon's UFO office was brought in to consult during these incidents. There were a number of different options considered. One of them was using directed energy to shoot or disable the drones. Another was to jam the drones. And another was kind of my favorite, which was to shoot big nets into the air and capture them. Problem with almost all these were that there was no authority, no legal authority, and some of these things caused problems, like jamming a drone could potentially disable the 911 system, 911 system on the ground, and that would be problematic. Others could potentially, you could shoot a drone down, but it could land on somebody's head, and that's no good either.
The first issue lies in U.S. law. Military forces are restricted from operating in domestic airspace under posse comitatus, a law that prohibits federal troops from engaging in police actions on American soil without congressional approval. That includes responding to airborne threats, unless there is an imminent national security justification. So, unless a drone directly endangers a civilian aircraft or military asset, armed engagement inside U.S. borders remains legally complicated. Even if the drone is clearly hostile, rules of engagement must pass through multiple command channels, often requiring real-time confirmation from the Department of Defense or the National Command Authority. By the time that happens, the drone is gone. The second issue is fragmentation. The Pentagon doesn't handle airspace security alone. It shares authority with the FAA, Homeland Security, NORAD, and in some cases, state and local law enforcement. The result? No single agency owns the drone problem. An object spotted over a military base is reported through defense channels. An object seen by commercial pilots is filed with the FAA. An object flying near a naval ship is tracked by the Coast Guard or U.S. Navy, but rarely are these incidents combined into a shared threat profile. The data is scattered, the reporting is inconsistent, and the protocols are outdated. Most radar systems were built to track aircraft the size of a Cessna or larger. Many drones, especially those flying below 1,000 feet or operating autonomously without RF signals, don't register cleanly on existing radar. They appear, flicker, and vanish. In 2023, the Department of Defense stood up the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, tasked with identifying and analyzing unexplained aerial phenomena. While its mission includes drones and conventional technology, AARO has been buried in backlog, reviewing historical UFO reports, analyzing military sightings, and handling congressional pressure with limited resources and unclear directives. The result is a system that identifies threats in real time, but doesn't respond to them in real time. To make matters worse, counter-UAS technology remains in its infancy. Yes, the military can shoot down drones. Yes, it has jamming capabilities and directed energy platforms, but these systems are either experimental, location-specific, or restricted by laws against interfering with the electromagnetic spectrum, particularly in populated areas. If a swarm appears over an Air Force base, there's still no universally accepted playbook. Do you jam? Do you launch interceptors? Do you risk misidentifying a civilian aircraft? This uncertainty has bred caution, and that caution has created a loophole. Whoever is operating these drones, foreign, domestic, or otherwise, understands the limitations. They know the altitude ceilings, they know the time windows, they know that a drone flying just outside of engagement protocols can avoid consequence entirely. It's not just a technological advantage, it's a procedural one, and this may explain why the Pentagon has remained publicly quiet. Because the reality is uncomfortable. The system isn't built to respond, it's built to verify, to assess, to wait. And in this new environment where threats are small, fast, and often autonomous, waiting is the very thing that gives them freedom to move. By staying silent, the Pentagon avoids panic. It avoids having to admit that unknown drones have breached U.S. military airspace repeatedly without consequence. But that silence comes at a cost. It sends a message, not just to the public but to whoever's watching. The skies are open and no one is coming.
We don't have exact confirmation on where these things are coming from. We do have some videos, but I just wonder what your take is on what we're seeing right now and sort of how people should be approaching what we're seeing.
Well, it's a bit of a mystery in that it has been remarkably persistent, meaning authorities in New Jersey tell me that they have had reports and sightings every single night except Thanksgiving, which is interesting. But the possibilities are foreign actors gathering intelligence, possibly on military locations. Could that be Russia? Could that be China? Could that be Iran? We've seen those kinds of things before. If you recall, almost 2 years ago, we had that Chinese military balloon that crossed across the United States with camera equipment and high-resolution equipment on board. Could it be drone enthusiasts who are playing some kind of aerial game? Could it be U.S. government doing a red team exercise against air bases to test their response to drone incursions? Right now, what the White House is saying is that They have no evidence to believe it's a threat to public safety or aviation, no evidence to say that it is foreign, but they don't say what they think it is.
For all the sightings, breaches, and incidents recorded over the past 2 years, there's still one question no agency has answered publicly. Who's behind these drones? There are no signatures, no recovered wreckage, no broadcast signals intercepted. Not one organization, foreign or domestic, has claimed responsibility. And yet the patterns suggest intelligence, intent, coordination. Across defense analysis circles, 3 leading categories of operators are discussed. None are proven, but each has evidence that can't be dismissed. China, Russia, Iran, even North Korea. These countries have invested heavily in drone warfare, surveillance swarms, and next-generation aerial tech. China in particular has shown rapid capability development, fielding hypersonic drones, low observable UAVs, and autonomous loitering munitions.
And not necessarily related, but coincidentally, yesterday the Justice Department announced federal charges against a Chinese national who was arrested in Santa Barbara County for launching a drone over a Space Force base, which was taking pictures. And in their search warrants, they found out he had been researching the base and researching the rules and talking to other people about could he jailbreak the drone to make it fly higher and be less detectable as it went over the base. So, you know, we know that there are people who do surveillance on military locations.
In November, large drones spotted in the sky at night over central and northern New Jersey are getting the attention of government officials. New Jersey Congressman Jeff Van Drew on Wednesday claimed that one of America's enemies is responsible for these mysterious sightings.
I'm going to tell you the real deal. Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones. That mothership is off, I'm going to tell you the deal. It's off the east coast of the United States of America. They've launched drones, is everything that we can see or hear. And again, these are from high sources. I don't say this lightly. Now, you know, we know there was a probability it could have been our own government. We know it's not our own government because they would have let us know. It could have been some really glorified hobbyist or hobbyists that were doing something unbelievable. They don't have the technology. But let's pretend that's possible. The third possibility was somebody, an adversarial country, doing this. Know that Iran made a deal with China to purchase drones, motherships, and technology in order to go forward. The sources I have are good. They can't reveal who they are because they are speaking to me in confidentiality. These drones should be shot down.
The theory here is simple. They're testing U.S. air defense responses, not to provoke a war, but to measure detection latency, radar blind spots, and engagement thresholds. Langley, Arizona, and New Jersey were all strategic sites, each near either active air bases, maritime routes, or critical infrastructure. The deeper concern is that if these are state actors, they're not just flying blind. They know where to look, they know how not to get caught, and they may already be inside U.S. defense perimeters without ever being identified. Still, no hard proof has surfaced, no drone has been downed, and intelligence agencies have, so far, offered only vague references to unknown capabilities. That suggests either extreme discretion or something much more classified.
But one reason that there's speculation that they may not be an adversary like China or Russia trying to spy is because they're right there out in the open. There seems to be no effort to be low-key or try to hide this, which is what you might expect when one government tries to spy on another government.
Another possibility? These incursions aren't foreign at all. The U.S. military, alongside defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman, runs dozens of classified drone programs. Many of them never see the light of day. In this theory, what we're seeing isn't espionage, it's testing. Black-budget programs launched to probe friendly installations, evaluate drone detection systems, or test autonomous navigation in contested airspace. The incursions are real, but internal, unauthorized to the bases they fly over, but known higher up. This would explain the silence, the lack of press coverage, and why nothing is ever shot down. But it also raises serious concerns about internal transparency. Are some programs flying blind through active military zones? Are they intentionally keeping base command in the dark? If these systems are domestic and the military still doesn't know who's flying them, that's a failure of internal control on a dangerous scale.
Sabrina, can you tell me what the Pentagon is doing to address this issue of drone sightings over New Jersey? It's near sensitive installations. The FBI is involved. What is the Pentagon doing?
Sure. So at this time, aware of those drone sightings that have been reported, at this time we have no evidence that these activities are coming from a foreign entity or the work of an adversary. We're going to continue to monitor what is happening, but at no point were our installations threatened when this activity was occurring. These are not U.S. military drones. Again, this is being investigated by local law enforcement. What our initial assessment here is that these are not drones or activities coming from a foreign entity or adversary.
Representative Jeff Van Drew, who is a Republican from New Jersey, was just on the air saying that Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones, and that mothership is off the coast of the east coast of the United States. Is there any truth to that?
There is not any truth to that. There is no Iranian ship off the coast of the United States, and there's no so-called mothership launching drones towards the United States.
A third option? The drones are neither foreign nor officially domestic. Instead, they may be operated by rogue entities, contractors, intelligence cutouts, or even private players using military-grade tech outside oversight. The black market for advanced drones has grown rapidly. Autonomous navigation, optical cloaking, satellite control, these tools are no longer limited to nation-states. In some scenarios, what's being tested isn't just surveillance, it's gray zone warfare. A private actor could simulate foreign capabilities to create confusion, or worse, simulate a foreign attack to provoke a real-world political response. This is a nightmare scenario for intelligence agencies. Technology advanced enough to breach U.S. bases, used by people with no flag. In the end, the truth remains concealed, either by operational secrecy, lack of evidence, or intentional silence. But one thing is certain, whoever is behind these drones, they're organized, they're skilled, and they've exploited a hole in America's airspace that still hasn't been closed. Behind closed doors, there's a reason some officials refuse to speak publicly about these drone incursions. Because while conventional theories, foreign actors, rogue operators, covert testing, dominate the conversation on paper, there are others that circulate more quietly, off-record, inside briefings that never make it to press, theories that, if proven, would reshape the entire narrative. Some of them begin where classified budgets end. For decades, the U.S. has funded special access programs, SAPs, operating outside traditional command structures. These programs often exist without congressional oversight. Their missions, aircraft, and technologies are exempt from standard disclosure, even within the Department of Defense. In this theory, the drones breaching U.S. military airspace are part of deeply compartmentalized weapons or surveillance systems. Tested in live environments, observed only by the teams who need to know, and never disclosed, even to the installations they fly over. It would explain why some bases weren't alerted, why there was no scramble protocol, why there was no interception, even when contact occurred. It would also explain why so few people inside the military seem able to speak confidently about the objects, because most of them are likely not read in. But this theory runs into one core contradiction. Why risk testing in populated high-stakes zones like Langley, Arizona, or near the East Coast? If these are truly internal tests, why not use remote bases or military corridors? Why the pattern of breaching sensitive areas without notice? The answer some propose is unsettling. The testing isn't about the drones themselves. It's about the reaction to them. A live simulation of how U.S. radar, command, and media channels respond under ambiguous pressure. Not a technical test, but a socio-political one. Another angle comes from insiders tied to aerospace contracting, engineers, security personnel, and even former Pentagon liaisons, who suggest something more provocative. that the craft seen over U.S. airspace may be based not on U.S. designs, but on recovered non-human technology. This theory often draws from statements made by high-level whistleblowers like Luis Elizondo and David Grush, both of whom allege that the U.S. government has had access to recovered non-human craft for years, possibly decades. If true, some of these drones could be reverse-engineered systems based on technology not originally developed by any known nation-state. Small-scale prototypes, automated, flown without disclosure to broader military branches. This would make them functionally unidentified, even to most personnel, and would explain why their performance, radar signature, and behavior seem outside the expected envelope. Still, this theory is speculative. No physical evidence has ever been presented to the public, and the agencies involved deny the existence of any such program. But the silence and the patterns continue to raise questions. And then there's the most controversial hypothesis, that the drones aren't ours, aren't foreign, and aren't reverse-engineered, that they are what they appear to be, intelligent, unannounced, and operating beyond human control. This theory isn't just fringe speculation. It stems from the growing body of military testimony on UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena that defy conventional explanations. Objects that hover without propulsion, accelerate without sonic booms, and appear to respond to observation. Some believe the drones seen over military sites are smaller probes, automated systems linked to larger phenomena not yet understood, that they're part of a larger, older pattern. It's a theory few in government will entertain publicly, but behind closed doors, it's gaining quiet traction, especially as more footage, more sightings, and more unanswered incidents emerge. In the end, all of these theories share one thing: a gap between what we know and what we're allowed to say. And until that gap is closed, the question remains open. Are we watching technology advance faster than policy, or are we witnessing something else entirely? With the volume of incursions increasing and the objects themselves growing more capable, you'd expect a proportional response from the U.S. military. Scrambles, intercepts, warnings, at the very least an official strategy, but in practice there hasn't been one. And that's not just political discretion, it's systemic vulnerability. The U.S. military, for all its air superiority doctrine, was never built to respond to this type of threat. Drones, especially small, autonomous, or uncrewed aerial systems, operate on an entirely different spectrum of warfare. They're cheap, quiet, fast, often invisible to conventional radar, and most importantly, they don't follow the rules traditional aircraft do. In a typical aerial engagement, rules of engagement are strict. Aircraft are identified, warned, tracked, and only engaged when all options are exhausted. But drones don't communicate. They don't respond. They don't flash transponder codes. And without a confirmed threat profile, a drone in U.S. airspace becomes a legal gray area, especially over domestic soil.
So, talk to us about these federal laws and regulations that are currently in place that make it more difficult, that hamper efforts to figure out what this is. What specifically do you think needs to change?
Well, there's a couple big things that need to change. There's a Senate bill that came out a couple years ago, Senate Bill 1631, and it was very promising. It was based on the Biden National Action Plan for Canada-U.S., or largely based on that. There's two big things that I think can really impact this. One is that owners and operators of critical infrastructure, as well as public safety agencies, should be able to start to use a wide variety of drone detection technologies, including some RF detection technologies that would otherwise be illegal for them to use, so that they can gather relevant information from those signals to determine where the pilot is, where the drone is, drone telemetry information, things like that. That's extremely important. The other piece that needs to happen is right now, state and local law enforcement don't have any authorities when appropriate and to use. They don't have any ability to use any drone defeat technologies. And the DHS and DOJ have been deploying these types of technologies hundreds of times since 2018 very successfully. So it's time to start evolving our laws so that we can successfully protect our critical infrastructure.
Military forces are restricted from engaging within the continental U.S. unless authorized at the highest levels. And even then, the use of force requires absolute confirmation of threat. That's difficult when the object is moving too fast to track, lacks a radar signature, or disappears before ground teams can respond. Then there's the issue of hardware.
Come to the room, Jen.
Sabrina, the Washington Post has a story out suggesting that Tower 22, the reason that the drone was able to get into Tower 22 and evade defensive systems is that there was no air defense system on site capable of shooting it down, that they were relying on electronic warfare that didn't work, and that the drone fired by the Iranian proxy was flying low enough that it evaded that measure. But why didn't Tower 22 as a base not have an air defense system capable of stopping this drone?
Yeah, thanks, Jen, for the question. So CENTCOM, as you know, is still doing its review. We're still assessing exactly what happened in that attack. And of course, CENTCOM and the Secretary will determine if there's any change or needs to be any change to our defensive posture at Tower 22 or any other base in the region. But I just don't have more for you on that specific attack. When I do, definitely let you know.
Most military radars were designed to detect aircraft, not drones the size of a car door or smaller. Unless the drone is broadcasting a known signal or flying directly into a sensor's path, it often escapes detection until it's already past the point of response. This is what's known internally as the close-in problem. The United States has excellent long-range air defense, but low, slow, small, and stealthy systems that get close before they're identified? That's where the vulnerability lies. There's also the matter of electronic warfare. While the U.S. does have counter-UAS systems, signal jammers, net interceptors, directed energy prototypes, most are deployed only in high-risk zones or test areas. They aren't widespread, and using them over populated zones poses safety and legal concerns. What's more, many of the drones in these incidents don't appear to use conventional RF-based control. They may be pre-programmed, autonomous, even capable of evading jamming, something that suggests a level of sophistication beyond commercially available tech. This makes real-time mitigation incredibly difficult. You can't jam what isn't broadcasting, you can't intercept what isn't being tracked, and you can't respond if no threat is officially declared. What remains is a policy vacuum. No single agency has complete authority, no unified detection system spans military and civilian airspace, and no clear playbook exists for unidentified, fast-moving drones operating at low altitude across critical infrastructure. That vacuum isn't just bureaucratic, it's operational. And whoever is behind these incursions, whether foreign, domestic, or unknown, has figured that out. The U.S. has overwhelming power at the strategic level, but at the tactical level, over cities, coastlines, and even military bases, its skies are open. And in the drone era, that's no longer a theoretical problem. It's already being exploited.
We haven't had any meaningful counter-UAS legislation since 2018, so I think we're well past due for lawmakers in Congress to get to work and to shore up some of those vulnerabilities that we have.
As of mid-2025, the mystery hasn't been solved. If anything, it's gotten more complicated. The Department of Defense's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, now tracks well over 850 unexplained drone and UAP incidents, most of which remain unresolved. A small number have been attributed to civilian drones or misidentified aircraft, but the rest, still classified, under investigation, or simply unexplained. The Langley intrusions, no official report. The Arizona collision, still marked as an unknown object. The East Coast swarms, no suspects, no recovery, no accountability. Publicly, the government continues to downplay the threat. Statements from military officials remain vague, no press briefings, no admission of foreign involvement, and no clear policies for prevention. Behind the scenes, defense contractors and intelligence agencies are quietly accelerating counter-drone research. New radars, autonomous interceptors, AI classifiers for sensor data, but they're still playing catch-up. Meanwhile, reports haven't stopped. If anything, they've shifted. now including sightings over nuclear facilities, energy grids, and civilian infrastructure. Some incidents are suppressed, others are dismissed, but those paying attention see the pattern. A persistent presence in restricted airspace, unidentified, unchallenged, unresolved. The drones are no longer the story, the silence is. Because whether these incursions are foreign probes, covert tests, or something entirely different, one thing is now clear. The United States has lost control of parts of its own airspace. The systems we trust to protect our skies weren't built for this kind of threat. The policies that guide our responses weren't designed for a world where aircraft don't have pilots, flags, or signatures. And the questions being asked, by pilots, by analysts, by the public, are going unanswered. So where are we now? We're in a moment of denial, a moment where technology has outpaced accountability, where facts are collected but explanations are withheld, and where the most powerful military on Earth continues to be tested by something it can't name. That is the state of our skies in 2025, not defended, not fully understood, just watched. What do you think is really behind these drone incursions? Foreign surveillance, covert tech, or something we haven't identified yet? Drop your theory in the comments. And if you want more investigations into military secrets, unexplained aerial events, and suppressed intelligence, hit like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel.